You ever wonder what happens when a fundamental law of science, something we've all just accepted as true for centuries, is suddenly challenged? What happens when someone comes along and says, that rule, the one everyone says is unbreakable, I think I just broke it.
This quote right here, this is the heart of our entire story today. It's from Professor Morad Sultan Azudi, and it perfectly captures this revolutionary idea that maybe, just maybe, some of the biggest walls in our knowledge aren't actual laws of nature, but just the edge of what we currently understand.
Okay, so let's get into it. We are talking about a problem that for 200 years has been a total mathematical dead end. Finding the exact answers to these super complex equations called high degree polynomials. And these aren't just, abstract puzzles for a chalkboard. They're the language we use to describe everything from physics to engineering.
For a long, long time, mathematicians were on a roll. They were knocking these things down one by one. Equations of the second degree, third degree, fourth degree. But then in 1824, as you can see on this timeline, the road just stopped. A brilliant young mathematician, Niels Henrik Abel, published a proof that seemed to end the whole quest.
And this is the wall he built, the Abel-Ruffini theorem. It basically became a law in algebra. It says you can't find a single general formula to solve equations of the fifth degree or higher if you're only using the standard tools. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and taking roots. The problem was officially declared impossible. So here's the really crucial point. This theorem forced everyone to make a huge compromise. Mathematicians had to give up on finding those perfect, pure answers. Instead, they had to rely on computer methods that could only get them close enough. Exactness, which is kind of the whole soul of algebra, was just off the table for these problems. But what if that wall, that supposed law of impossibility, was never really a law to begin with? What if it was just a limitation of the tools they had back then? Well, let's meet the person who is challenging this 200-year-old truth. Enter Professor Morad Sultan Azudi, and his argument is frankly radical. He claims that this 200-year-old impossibility isn't a mathematical fact at all, but more of a historical misunderstanding that happened because the way they saw algebra back in the 19th century was, well, incomplete. And this right here, this is what drives his work. It's this complete refusal to just accept the established boundaries. For him, getting close enough is not the end of the story. He believes exactness is what algebra is all about, and that a perfect solution has to exist somewhere.
So how in the world does he claim to do what generations of mathematicians thought was impossible? Let's put the classical approach side by side with his new theorem to really see what's going on here.
This table, wow, it shows such a dramatic contrast. Okay, so in the left column, you've got the old way. It accepts limits, it's built on these things called field theory, and ultimately depends on approximations. Then you look to the right. Azuidi's theorem is claiming 100% exact symbolic solutions. It's built on a totally different foundation, something called recursive discriminant structures. The philosophy is just a complete 180. It goes from this mathematical fatalism to proving every single equation has a perfect answer locked inside it.
And here's a great way to think about it. The old methods failed because their tools were just too simple for the job. It's like trying to open a super complex, high-tech bank vault with a regular old key. It's just not going to work. Azudi's method doesn't try to force the old key. Instead, it carefully analyzes the vault's internal structure and then builds a brand new master key designed specifically to open it. Okay, so this all sounds fantastic in theory, right? But theory only gets you so far. What does this new key actually unlock? Let's actually watch as the impossible gets solved. Here it is, a 20th degree polynomial. I mean, look at that thing. This is exactly the kind of mathematical beast that the Abel-Ruffini theorem said was symbolically unsolvable. For 200 years, the absolute best you could ever hope for was a messy decimal approximation of its solution. So how does the theorem handle it? Well, it's not magic, it's just a really clever and systematic process. First, you feed the equation into the system. Then, the theorem applies what it calls recursive transformations. That's a fancy way of saying it breaks the huge, scary problem down, step by step, into a chain of much simpler related pieces. Each step informs the next, until finally, the exact answer just naturally emerges. And boom, there's the result. Not a long, ugly decimal that goes on forever, but a clean, precise, and totally verifiable symbolic answer. This is the exactness that was supposed to be impossible.
This is that perfect answer that classical math had to give up on 2 centuries ago.
Look, solving one monstrously complex equation is an absolutely incredible claim, but the implications of what Professor Izuiti is proposing here are, well, they're way, way bigger than just a single answer to a single problem. This isn't just about a new formula. If this work holds up, it could fundamentally redefine what to solve an equation even means. It completely rejects that idea of mathematical fatalism and suggests that every equation contains the blueprint for its own perfect solution. This could blow open a whole new frontier in algebra and potentially change how we tackle problems in theoretical physics, complex modeling, maybe even cryptography. And that brings us right back to where we started. If a mathematical wall that has stood firm for 200 years can be challenged, it really forces us to ask a huge question. What other impossible problems out there, in math, in science, in anything, aren't truly impossible, but are really just waiting for someone, somewhere, to come up with a new way of thinking?